Right, where were we?
So The Boys Season 3 is here to humor us and traumatize us in equal measure. Seriously, I still see that urethra scene every time that I close my eyes. Although, it did basically confirm the whole fan theory about Ant-Man and Thanos and how he could have easily beaten him if he had just, you know. Although the scene in The Boys was admittedly a different orifice, but anyways, I'm going on a very dangerous tangent here.
Yeah, never do that again.
So before I go any further, let's properly introduce the video as we take a look at some of the things that you might have missed in episodes 1 through 3 of The Boys Season 3. And yes, there will obviously be spoilers in this video, like the one I just mentioned. With all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. First off the bat is the amount of superhero movie references and parodies, especially the ones aimed at Marvel. For starters, the Vought Studios logo looks strikingly like that of the Marvel Studios one, while the Dawn of the Seven poster and score is certainly very similar to the ones used for Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. Another similarity comes as Homelander faces off with quote-unquote Stormfront in Dawn of the Seven, before being backed up by the rest of the Seven as they make their entrance by saying, "He's not alone." This is of course a parody of the She's Not Alone scene in Infinity War when Black Widow and Okoye come to Scarlet Witch's aid. This moment is made slightly more meta by the fact that the Stormfront in the movie is played by none other than Charlize Theron, who also made a shock appearance in the mid-credit scene of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness as the character Clea. But it's not just Marvel that's in the firing line in terms of parody, with DC, and in particular the Justice League, also being made fun of. I mean, Dawn of the Seven is very clearly a reference to Dawn of Justice. Of course, the likes of Homelander, A-Train, and Queen Maeve are parodies of Superman, Flash, and Wonder Woman respectively, so it's no surprise that the boys made fun of all the troubles the DCEU has faced over the years. When interviewing the director of the Dawn of the Seven, various reshoots and rehashings of the movie are brought up due to the controversy surrounding one of the movie's stars, Stormfront. The director also mentions that fans successfully petitioned for the Rourke Cut, which is clearly a parody of the Snyder Cut and how fans effectively forced Warner Brothers into completing and releasing Snyder's vision for that movie. Continuing on with the references in the Dawn of the Seven, the movie goes through some typical blockbuster tropes that we're all pretty familiar with. At one point, Stormfront tells Homelander to join her, so they can effectively rule the world together, which feels a lot like it was plucked out of Empire Strikes Back. While the "you and I are the same" line between the hero and villain is also a very overused trope.
You and I are the same. Perfect genetic specimens.
With it appearing in the likes of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Transformers, and X-Men First Class, just to name a few. The boys, however, aren't the first person to spoof this line, with Austin Powers famously poking fun at the cliche.
Remember when I told you we're not so different, you and I? We're not so different, you and I.
Another movie reference that appears in the Dawn of the Seven movie is when Homelander and Stormfront fight each other, and their powers connect and start pushing the other back. This is an image ripped out of the wizarding duels between Harry Potter and Voldemort in Goblet of Fire and Deathly Hallows Part 2, and, you know, pretty much every other wizarding duel in general, all of which use very similar imagery. Soldier Boy is clearly a parody of Captain America, something which is reinforced by the fact that he is played by Jensen Ackles, who famously auditioned for the part of Steve Rogers in the MCU. The two even have a similar wartime propaganda video of their origins and how they fought together to save the Allied forces in a museum. But this video is also likely a parody of actual wartime propaganda videos, such as the film series Why We Fight, and the films made by the likes of Frank Capra and Anthony Vaylor. Also, another little Easter egg in this video is when he claims to have a list of communists. This is a parody of the McCarthy lists and McCarthyism in general, which saw Senator Joseph McCarthy providing a list of so-called communists, which effectively started a witch hunt. At the start of episode 3, we see a young Starlight singing Britney Spears' hit song, Hit Me Baby One More Time. Bad pun very much intended there, by the way. All while performing in a pageant. This song choice seems pretty fitting, seeing as Britney also made her way up in the pageant scene at a young age. Both are Southern belles with religious upbringing, and both have a strained relationship with a parent. One of my favorite jokes in the first few episodes is the one that comes at the expense of one of the best cinematographers around. As Homelander talks down a suicidal girl, Ashley and her Vought news team wait down below to capture the heroic image of Homelander saving the day. As Ashley directs her crew, she tells them to zoom in, adding the line, "You're not Roger Deakins," referencing the cinematographer famous for his cinematic wide shots in the likes of 1917, Skyfall, and Blade Runner 2049, as well as countless others. Unfortunately for Ashley, I doubt that she would really want to use any footage from that event anyways. This next one is less of a reference, but pertains to a piece of ironic dialogue and foreshadowing. As Newman and Huey talk in a conference room, she convinces Huey that they are doing the right thing, cutting out soup collateral by 60%, and doing so by going through the law and not blood and guts. Of course, unknown to Huey, at the time anyways, she is actually the secret soup that's going around popping people's heads like some kind of body horror water balloons. This all then sets up the very violent ending where Newman encounters a soup from her childhood who threatens to expose her, which she ends up killing in her typically gory fashion. Now, this one is kind of obvious, but it's worth mentioning. The reality TV show that focuses on the next entrant into the Seven is clearly a parody of talent shows such as American Idol and The X Factor, with just a little bit of The Bachelor thrown in there for some extra spice.
You deserve a second chance.
Thank you, Starlight. Looks like we've all grown.
But the particular parody I want to mention is that of Starlight's ex-flame, Supersonic. It turns out Supersonic was in a boy band called Super Sweet, with them having a creepy #1 hit song called License to Drive. Now, the group is clearly meant to be a parody of boy bands from the early 2000s and slightly later, in particular NSYNC and Backstreet Boys.
Tell me why!
Which is kind of fitting, because they're the Backstreet Boys and the show is called The Boys. Actually, you know what? Never mind. Let's move on. As you know, The Deep, for lack of a better term, got in deep with a cult-like organization and then got out of it by publishing a best-selling book, Deeper, and becoming the thinking man superhero. But what makes the Deep's arc more interesting is the meta joke he makes when talking to Homelander, as he asks whether or not he saw the piece Malcolm Gladwell wrote up on him in the New Yorker, which was situated next to Leah Remini. Famously, Leah Remini exited the Church of Scientology on tumultuous terms, and has since spoken out about her time inside the organization. Speaking of Deeper though, the film Not Without My Dolphin on VTV is likely a parody of Hallmark movies. I don't know, I'd totally watch it. Also, rest in peace, Timothy the Octopus. You were taken from us just far too soon. In episode 3, we get a flashback to Nicaragua and what really happened to Soldier Boy. But we also see something else, Black Noir's origin story. Here's the thing though, Black Noir's origin story as it is presented here is very different to the one from the comics, which I actually don't really want to get into because of potential spoilers. But it seems like they might be going in a drastically different direction with the character. Also, fun fact, his name is super redundant because Noir just means black, so his name is Black Black. I know that I said it's a cliche, but let's face it, other than weird fetishes, Butcher and Homelander aren't really that different, as they're not afraid to commit violence to get what they want. But there is an ironic similarity between the two showcased within the first 2 episodes. They both see themselves as Jesus, kind of. At the end of episode 2, Homelander goes on a rant to the suicidal girl after learning of Stormfront's death that he sees himself as an omnipotent godlike figure, and he connects with Jesus on an emotional level. On the other side of the coin, in the moment in episode 1 where Butcher catches Huey by surprise, Huey exclaims, "Jesus Christ," to which Butcher jokes,
Not quite.
"Yeah, I know you can argue that this entry is a bit of a stretch, but we're in a rush to make it, so it's what we're going with." Now, if you thought that last one was a bit contentious, you're bound to think this next one is. But did anyone else think that the Vought theme park, Vaughtland, was something straight out of Duloc and Shrek? As the theme park felt like a weird blend of Disneyland and the Waystar Royco theme park in succession. Definitely giving me some Duloc vibes, but that might just be me. To justify this weak entry, I'm also going to include the pop culture food stands with pun names that can be seen in the background, with my personal favorite being Woke Walk. It's just fun to say. Moving on to episode 3, when asked to stand up and say something about Blue Hawk, A-Train says he is Michael Jordan, not Malcolm X. This is a joke poking fun at the fact that Michael Jordan famously stayed out of politics during his playing days. Now, this one isn't specific to season 3, but instead of being shot and filmed in New York, where the show is set, it's actually filmed in Toronto, with a number of famous buildings and areas being visible throughout. The building that serves as the foundation for Vought Towers is actually Roy Thompson Hall, a famous theater and TIFF location in the city. And although I can't say for certain, the interior of the hall where Homelander's televised birthday celebration is taking place looks very similar to that of Roy Thompson Hall. Fun fact for any fans of The Six out there. Another contentious reference is one possibly made to one of the biggest shows of all time, Breaking Bad. Throughout the first 2 episodes, but in particular as he watches the Dawn of the Seven, a ringing can be heard in Homelander's ears as he zones out and remains in his deranged state of mind. The ear ringing effect reminds me greatly of the scene in episode 1 of Breaking Bad, where Walt learns he has cancer for the first time and we can only hear his ears ringing until he eventually points out a mustard stain on the doctor's shirt. I mean, a Breaking Bad reference would actually be quite appropriate, seeing as Giancarlo Esposito does a fantastic job in both series. Screensavers and background wallpapers in the show offer us nice little Easter eggs, as well as insights as to who the characters hold most near and dear to them. If we look at Huey's screen in episode 2, we can see a picture of him in Starlight, while on Butcher's, although the view is very obscured, we can see a picture of Butcher's old bulldog, Terror. Another shout out to Terror comes in the cookie jar sitting on Butcher's desk, which also looks a lot like the one that M had in Skyfall. Probably not an intentional reference there, but I figured I'd mention it. Another thing we noticed on Butcher's desktop is the video from Ryan that says, "Running late," which he watches to help him sleep. Is this a dark reference to the opening incident where A-Train ran through Robin, thus setting the show in motion? Probably not, but you never know. I don't know if this was actual foreshadowing or has any relevance at all, but Huey's hand injury with the mustard jar looked like it was foreshadowed in the episode just a little bit beforehand, with a close-up shot of the jar, albeit a different one, indicating that Huey struggled to open them. Maybe this will have significance later on, like you'll have to try to open a jar to save Starlight or Butcher or somebody. Who really knows? We are just now starting to get a glimpse of Mother Milk's true backstory and how it links to Soldier Boy, and the man who plays him, Laz Alonso, has confirmed that we will be seeing a lot more of his backstory this season. The actor also revealed that he has a lot of say over the character's dialogue to make it more authentic, and is allowed to add his own stamp to the character. The only time that anything that he does is vetoed by the show's creators is when it directly contradicts what they have planned. In terms of graphic violence, episode 4 is pretty tame by the boys' standards. And seeing as this episode included a massive fight featuring things that I shouldn't mention in the first 30 seconds of this video, that really tells you something. But there were still a bunch of little Easter eggs, hidden jokes, and references to the comic books, all of which we wanted to take a look at here as we go through some of the things that you might have missed in episode 4 of The Boys' 3rd season. And yes, there will be spoilers. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So the later stages of the episode follows the boys as they search a Russian laboratory for the supposed weapon that killed Soldier Boy, only to learn that the weapon didn't actually kill Soldier Boy, but is Soldier Boy. It turns out that after the debacle in Guatemala, the Russians took Soldier Boy very much alive body to a secret laboratory in Russia where they conducted a series of tests on him, seemingly reproducing their very own replica of Compound V, and turned him into an even more powerful soup with the apparent means to render other soups powerless. Now, apart from the whole massive laser beam coming out of his chest thing, this story is obviously pretty close to a character from Marvel Comics, Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, who was of course abducted, experimented on, and turned into a dangerous weapon. With Soldier Boy now on the loose, it is very likely that he will become the boys' main adversary throughout the rest of the season, and even pose a massive threat to the current most powerful soup, Homelander.
Okay.
But will Soldier Boy have a redemptive arc just like Bucky did in the MCU? Maybe even restore a boat with Anthony Mackie and share a six-pack? Well, seeing as this is The Boys, I wouldn't put money on it. But with Soldier Boy now AWOL, it would be nice to see how Homelander and Vought deal with the reappearance of their presumably dead poster boy, and how Homelander will try and deal with it without the help of Edgar covering everything up.
What good would that do?
Speaking of the Russian laboratory scene though, one of the best sequences has to be when the V'd up hamster goes on a White Rabbit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail-esque violent killing spree. But while this is a hilarious sequence in of itself, you may have missed the fun reference to the comics. As Frenchie and Mother's Milk look at the hamster, they learn that its name is Jamie. This is a reference to the hamster from the boys' comics, where Huey discovered him living in the anus, yeah you heard that right, of supervillain Blarney Cock after Huey accidentally killed him. Originally named Huey, Herbie felt sorry for the hamster and ended up keeping it as a pet. changing its name to Jamie instead. If we do see the souped up hamster again in The Boys, or whether or not Huey will take him as a pet, or even if he will go up against Homelander in a fight for the ages, is unclear. But we just hope that he doesn't end up with the same fate as Timothy the Octopus. Still missing you, Timmy. Gone way too soon.
Wasn't that delicious?
So while we have seen Butcher juicing up and quite clearly becoming addicted to temporary Compound V, this was our first time seeing Huey as a soup, after he secretly stole some of the V off of Butcher and gave himself teleportation powers. While this is a first for the show, the boys are no stranger to superpowers in the comics, with Butcher actually giving each member a dosage of Compound V to help them take out corrupt superheroes. Although in the comics, Huey doesn't take the Compound V willingly, and Butcher actually forcefully injects him with the substance, which gives him superpowers. However, his powers differ from the show in the comics, as instead of the power of teleportation, he has superhero strength and durability. Huey on Compound V has been foreshadowed throughout the season, such as him being angry that he can't open the jars in his and Starlight's apartment because she puts them on too tightly. But it is also foreshadowed in the episode as Huey seemingly gets frustrated that Starlight has to defend him once again as he squares up to Homelander. Also, quick side note, but did anyone else think that the fact that Huey loses his clothes when he teleports is a joke that the Hulk always manages to keep his pants on every single time he turns green? Or is it just me? The relationship between Frenchie and Kimiko is getting stronger and stronger, and we are totally shipping them over here. Probably because they were also shipped in the comics. But one of the sweetest moments between them comes as they plan to run away together, with Kimiko suggesting that they go to Frenchie's hometown of Marseille. However, while Marseille may have been his native town in the show, in the comics he was born in a small village, which according to Google Maps is an over 6-hour drive across the south of France from Marseille. While little else is known about Frenchie's backstory, it is also said that the town he grew up in actually spoke its own unique dialect of French. But as you know, the show has definitely played it fast and loose when it comes to sticking to the source material, case in point Black Noir, who, speaking of which, did anyone catch that drawing? Because that to me looked like Alvin the Chipmunk. The Boys has no qualms satirizing pop culture and real-life events, TV shows, and even ads. And the most notable instance of this is the cringeworthy commercial A-Train shoots for his energy drink, Turbo Rush. This commercial is an almost shot-for-shot remake of the infamous Kendall Jenner Pepsi commercial, except unlike the Pepsi ad, it's not inexplicably over 4 minutes long. A possible movie reference comes at the beginning of the episode where in a flashback, a young Mother's Milk is playing with what I believe is, sincere apologies if I'm wrong here, a 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. For any car/Burt Reynolds buffs out there, you will know that the 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am is an iconic car from the movie Smokey and the Bandit, where Reynolds' bandit accepts a job to deliver Coors from Texas to Georgia within 28 hours, all the while being hunted down by Sheriff Buford T. Justice, a character who would feel right at home in The Boys. Mixed in that scene with the flashback of Mother's Milk and the Trans Am is a taped recorder of Soulja Boy singing a hilariously bad cover of Rapture by Blondie on the show Solid Gold. For any people who were wondering, Solid Gold was indeed a real music variety show that ran from 1980 to 1988, where most of the stars actually lip-synced their performances. Also on the subject of music, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Russian cover of I Will Survive during the whole Kimiko fight scene. Weird choice, but it worked. Homelander's usual way of getting what he wants and keeping order is by committing horrific acts of violence. But his way of ousting Edgar and becoming the new leader of Vought was a surprisingly bloodless coup, using Edgar's secret weapon, Newman, against him. It's no surprise that Homelander would go after Edgar, but the timing was a little bit shocking. However, it was actually somewhat foreshadowed in the episode. As Homelander talks on the Cameron Coleman Hour, he alludes to people secretly pulling the strings in a bid to make him look like the bad guy, including people in Vought itself. The scene then quickly cuts to Edgar as he brings a coffee to Newman, suggesting that Homelander already had his sights on taking down Edgar. You would have likely seen this one, but it's worth mentioning. As the show sets the scene in Russia, we see a bunch of graffiti that portrays the Seven in an unflattering light. When you take into account how the show sets up the way the Seven are seen in the US as heroes and celebrities, this is an almost direct juxtaposition of how they are seen and portrayed in the US. And it is an interesting look at how people outside of the US actually see the Supes. Also, did anyone catch the comic character in the background of Butcher and Mother Milk's conversation? My eyes aren't quite what they used to be staring at screens all day, so if anyone knows who that character is, please let me know down in the comments below. We have mentioned it before, but the parallels between Homelander and Butcher are only starting to deepen. and as Butcher becomes more and more addicted to his Homelander-like powers, he is becoming much more selfish and tyrannical, just like the man that he hates the most. In one scene in particular, Butcher sounded just like Homelander as he says, "I'll tell you what to do, and you'll do it," which is especially prevalent as it comes in the episode where Homelander assumes control of Vought and threatens anyone who was previously aligned with Edgar. With Butcher becoming more and more like Homelander and his addiction to Compound V becoming more and more severe, we can imagine it coming to a dangerous head at the end of the season. Back to the scene where Homelander takes control of Vought, saying that the company should be run by Supes. He says that this is the real Dawn of the Seven. This is of course a reference to the movie version of the Seven seen in the first episode of season 3.
You and I are the same. Perfect genetic specimens.
This is a bit contentious, but as Edgar and Homelander verbally spar, Edgar calls Homelander bad product, referring to the fact that he is essentially created in a test tube and is a product of the company. But could it also be a reference to Breaking Bad and Giancarlo Esposito's meth-dealing past? It's contentious, as I said, but the whole respect line could have easily been something Gus Fring said to Walter White in that show. As the boys storm the Russian laboratory, Mother's Milk makes a joking reference to the movies Rocky IV and Red Dawn. This is of course references to when the US went up against Russia, such as Rocky versus Ivan Drago and Patrick Swayze versus the Russian army, respectively. One of the best jokes in the episode comes when the boys go get on the private plane, and Butcher makes the joke, "Pretend we're on Entourage," or as my friends call it, Sex in the City for men. Of course, Entourage, or Entourage, follows actor Vince and his, well, entourage as they live a lavish lifestyle, like getting on a load of private jets. And finally, I'm not sure if there is any relevance to anything here, but it's been pretty fun looking at all the different rap shirts that Mother's Milk has worn so far throughout the season, with him wearing an NWA and Rough Rider shirt in this episode alone. And finally, Homelander has done some pretty heinous, unforgivable things, like brutally murdering Sonic Boom for one. But one of his worst crimes has to be giving the Seven some amazing looking taco bowls and then instantly dismissing them.
Yeah, I don't really speak Spanish, sir.
Like seriously, they did actually look muy delicioso. The Boys Episode 5 is another hour filled with Easter eggs, hidden references in the background, and callbacks to the comics, as well as some hilarious cameos. So instead of sitting here and just hammering out an intro for you guys that you're probably gonna skip over, let's instead take a look at all the things that you might have missed. And yes, there will be spoilers for the episode in this video. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it.
God, okay, so why don't you go and do that?
Before he was cast as Soldier Boy in The Boys, Jensen Ackles played the role of Dean Winchester in a little show called Supernatural. You may not have heard of it, it only ran for like 15 seasons or something like that.
You don't say.
Ackles is probably best known for his Supernatural days, so it's unsurprising that The Boys insert a little Easter egg back to that classic show. As Soldier Boy walks through the streets of Manhattan, acclimating to his life in the US in the 21st century, he sees multiple images of the new Supes in town, including Homelander and Queen Maeve. Most importantly, however, he sees numerous election posters for presidential candidate and current Secretary of Defense Robert Singer plastered on walls and lampposts. Robert Singer's actor, Jim Beaver, also appeared in Supernatural as the character Bobby Singer, or if you were to use his full name, Robert Singer. To be fair, he does look much more like a Robert Singer than a Jim Beaver, whatever that means.
Hey, ass butt.
Ass butt?
Speaking of Soldier Boy, it became clear that he paid a visit to MM's contact and former Vought employee, Legend, in order to pick up his old super suit.
No, it's not a name, it's a level.
Legend is very much stuck in the past, something expressed with all the pictures and posters on his walls, but more on that later. Now, Legend is a new character to the show, but he's a famous one from the comics, albeit a rather controversial one. That's because he's a parody of Marvel legend Stan Lee. In the comics, Legend, or Old Legend as he is known, is an elderly comic book store owner with an insatiable appetite. And no, I'm not referring to food, who has an expansive knowledge on basically every soup on the planet. Legend had yet to appear on the show as the character was deemed too disrespectful to Lee, and there are actors who had gone so far as to label the role as career suicide. Given that Lee sadly passed away in 2018, 1 year before The Boys premiered, making a joke at his expense would have been seen as going too far. even by the boys' standards. That's why the show seemingly did away with the Lee parody, instead turning the character into a caricature of his sleazy 70s Hollywood producers. But they did at least fit him with some Stan Lee style glasses. Continuing on with Legend, in his apartment we see many posters and paraphernalia for an era long since gone, with him having pictures of himself taken with Burt Reynolds and Carrie Fisher on the walls of his apartment, as well as posters to fake movies. But also in the background there is a picture that is potentially much more concerning. At roughly around the 34 minutes and 53 second mark, a black and white sketch of a man with glasses can be seen in the background. Now, while it isn't a dead ringer, it does look a lot like the infamous sketch of the Zodiac Killer who plagued Northern California in the 1960s. Could this be suggesting that Legend is the Zodiac Killer, or at least knows him? Might be a stretch, but it's worth mentioning. Speaking of stretches though, could the Marlon Brando reference be a joke at the bizarre internet theory about Homeland actor Anthony Starr? There are some on Reddit who believe that Starr has cotton in his mouth to expand his jaw, something which Brando did for his role as Don Corleone in The Godfather. It's a stretch, I know, but in this day and age and in this business, you have to assume everything is an Easter egg, to a certain point. As we have mentioned, there are some parallels that can be drawn between Soldier Boy and Winter Soldier, other than the fact that they both have soldier in their name, as both were kidnapped and subjected to a series of tests that turned them into secret weapons. They also seemingly have trigger words that set their powers into motion. During episode 5, as Soldier Boy walks through Manhattan, he hears a Russian song from a radio which triggers him to cause an explosion that kills 19 people. This is similar to the string of trigger words such as longing, rusted, 17, daybreak, that turns Bucky back into his Winter Soldier alter ego. Speaking of Soldier Boy exploding though, could this all be foreshadowing a potential showdown with Homelander and a possible means of defeating him? After the explosion in Manhattan, Butcher used a Geiger counter which picks up radiation from the explosion site. Later on, as Soldier Boy approaches the home of his old flame Crimson Countess, Butcher uses the Geiger counter again to anticipate Soldier Boy's arrival, all of which suggests that Soldier Boy's explosive powers are nuclear. Now, while Homelander doesn't have any stated weaknesses and is damn near invincible, it is suggested in the comics that he can be killed by a nuclear explosion. In fact, to keep him in line, Vought threatened Homelander with a nuclear bomb, even attaching one to him so that he doesn't go rogue. With Butcher now teaming up with Soldier Boy, he could potentially use Soldier Boy's powers to kill Homelander once and for all. But seeing as this is the boys, we can imagine this won't go quite to plan, and there will be predictably some collateral damage. Speaking of Homelander in the comics, Anthony Starr's look and costume design do look, for the most part, pretty in keeping with the Homelander that we see on the page, although there are still some notable differences. However, we do see an even more comic book accurate Homelander, as when MM goes to pick up his daughter, we see an animated image of Homelander on a lunchbox. Speaking of this scene though, did anyone catch any Easter eggs with the paper that Todd was marking? I didn't catch any myself, but I do wonder why the camera stayed on that piece of paper for so long. And as I said earlier, in this business you have to assume that everything is an Easter egg. But that raises the question though, once everything is an Easter egg, doesn't that mean that nothing is an Easter egg? Food for thought. The repercussions of Kimiko's fight with Soldier Boy in episode 4 still play through in episode 5, with Kimiko still unable to use her powers, with both her super strength and ability to heal quickly stripped away. While this doesn't happen in the comics, Kimiko, or the female as she is known, does end up in the hospital and does have a similar arc to the show version of the character, although in a different way. In the comics, the female winds up in the hospital after she is left badly injured because of a fight with Stormfront. Huey stays with her while she is bedbound, and after innocently trying to take one of her chocolate limes, Kimiko ends up breaking his arm, because Kimiko doesn't share food. As we pointed out, these are similar story beats to what we have seen on the show, just all jumbled up, as Kimiko ends up breaking Huey's arm as a cover so that he has an excuse to call in sick with Newman. And she does, of course, end up in the hospital after a fight with Soldier Boy. Chocolate limes are also mentioned, with Nina bringing Kimiko some for when she gets better. Keeping on Kimiko in the hospital, she has a dream sequence where she imagines herself in a musical number where she can dance and sing, which gives me some make 'em laugh from Singing in the Rain vibes, as well as other classical musical numbers from the 50s and beyond. Just in case you were wondering though, the song that Kimiko is singing is I Got Rhythm from the 1943 movie Girl Crazy, which starred Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Like Legend, Blue Hawk is a new character to the boys, but he is one that actually doesn't have a history in the comics, However, he could be a play of the character Groundhog in the comics and in the animated spin-off series Diabolical, who was an unflattering parody of the character Wolverine. However, instead of adamantium claws that come out of his knuckles, he instead has the less practical powers of hammers for hands. While Blue Hawk's powers may not be related to Wolverine, the leather jacket he wears does look like the motorcycle jacket sported by Logan in the movies, while the helmet Blue Hawk wears is slightly similar to the helmet worn by another mutant, Magneto. Queen Maeve is definitely one of the most sympathetic characters on the show, at least when it comes to the soups anyways. And it's safe to say she's had a pretty rough go of it, especially when it comes to alcoholism and her gin habit. While Queen Maeve is an alcoholic in the comics and does have sympathy for Starlight, she doesn't have a physical relationship with Butcher like she does in the show. However, she does actually have a relationship with Stormfront, who's a man in the comics. And they end up having a soup child together, Blarney Cock, who was accidentally killed by Huey in the comics and was the original owner of Jamie the hamster. You know, the one that went on a beat-up killing spree. Sorry, I just wanted to think about that scene again. Early on in the episode, Huey vomits out the remaining Compound V from his system, which was hilariously described by Butcher as Kermit's thing that I won't repeat on YouTube. Anyway, as Butcher watches Huey vomit, he flashes to a younger character before reverting back to Huey. This is likely a reference to Butcher's younger brother Lenny, who unalived himself before the events of Season 1, something which Butcher still feels guilty and remorseful over. This also suggests that, despite being a hard bastard, Butcher sees Huey as a younger brother, and will likely not want to make the same mistakes that he did with Lenny. Episode 5 of The Boys had a hilarious cameo from none other than Seth Rogen, in a scene that totally gave me vibes of a particular scene from the movie Long Shot, which is again something that I won't say out loud on YouTube. What makes this cameo even more important though is Seth Rogen's history with the show, as alongside his longtime collaborator Evan Goldberg, he's an executive producer on the show, and it is likely that it would have never made it to the screen at all if it wasn't for his involvement with the project. As Huey justifies taking Compound V to Starlight, he says that he knows about the concerns of addiction as he's seen the movie Trainspotting. This is a pretty apt reference, as not only does the movie follow a group of addicts, in particular Ewan McGregor's Renton, who stumbles through bad ideas and sobriety attempts with his unreliable friends, but it's also set in Scotland, where the character Huey is from in the comics. Another, admittedly more obvious movie reference made by Huey is the one about Dom Toretto from Fast and the Furious. In particular, the joke about family, which is basically all over the internet.
Because I'm quick and I'm all about family.
Almond Joy has been a reoccurring gag in The Boys, not only being a common love between Huey and Starlight, but it's also Black Noir's main weakness. Well, along with fire, apparently. This show makes a callback to Almond Joy's in episode 5 as Huey offers Starlight a series of refreshments, including Almond Joy's, before he tells her that he's been juicing up on Compound V. Early on in the episode, as Homelander consolidates his power over Vought with a board meeting, one of the board members says that they were looking forward to working hand in glove with Homelander. This is a nice little joke to the fact that Homelander always wears gloves and seemingly never takes them off. It's a good thing he doesn't really sweat then. The Boys poked fun at all the major tropes in comic book movies with their faux film Dawn of the Seven, but they are also admittedly guilty of pulling one themselves. As Butcher approaches the site where Soldier Boy exploded, he takes his sunglasses off in shock, a cliche that's been seen all over Hollywood since basically the beginning of time. And in this episode of What Mother's Milk is Wearing, to continue on with the trend of hip-hop tees that he wears, in episode 5 he is wearing a Stop the Violence shirt, which is a reference to Boogie Down Productions. So episode 6 of The Boys delivered on multiple setups, including the first showdown between Soldier Boy and Homelander, the long brewing argument between Annie and Huey, and of course the infamous Herogasm. But let's cut out all that introduction crap and just go ahead and take a look at some of the more interesting details that you might not have caught in episode 6 of The Boys. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's address the elephant in the room and start off with the long-awaited screen debut of Herogasm, the events of which are far too crude to show or even really reference on YouTube. That's a really great start to this video, eh? In the show, we see a bunch of C-list supers, most of whom are seemingly parodies of X-Men characters such as Iceman, as they, with a bunch of, you know what, this whole video is probably going to be one giant black censor bar because I'm not going to be able to show any of this. Herogasm is pretty infamous in the comics, with it even getting its own 6-issue miniseries back in 2009. It's a week-long event where VOTS heroes from across the country attend an invite-only affair, which is located out on a remote tropical island. Like in the show, basically anything and everything goes. And the Supes get into a whole host of diabolical activities. Despite the show not exactly shying away from these kind of events, it was unclear whether or not Herogasm would appear on the show, as it was seen by some to be too extreme, even for the boys. But the show did eventually decide to bring Herogasm to the screen. It also acts as the backdrop for the first showdown between Homelander and Soldier Boy, and that's likely due to the history the two characters have with one another at the event. In the comics, Homelander actually slept with Soldier Boy, promising him a place in the Seven in return. But considering the fact that comic Soldier Boy and show Soldier Boy are drastically different from each other, my guess is they'll probably completely do away with that storyline. Understandably so. Speaking of Herogasm, in amongst a sea of new faces, and other parts, we did see one familiar one, the return of Love Sausage and his overly large, well, love sausage. Actually, to my knowledge anyway, this is the first time that he was referred to by that name outside of the comics, with the character seemingly liking the nickname given to him by MM. Like many others in the show, Love Sausage's character has been drastically changed from the comics, where he was one of the precious few superheroes Butcher and the boys actually liked. Love Sausage, aka Vasily Voroshikin, which now that I said it out loud I can totally hear the joke there, was born in Russia and was a police officer by day and Soviet superhero by night. However, by the time The Boys begins, Vasily is a humble bartender passing off brake fluid as alcohol. Love Sausage was somewhat caught in the crossfire of Soldier Boy and the twins, but he did make it out alive to gross out MM another day. As Soldier Boy continues to acclimate to life in the 21st century, he watches a film where he is tied up and being interrogated by a Soviet general in Afghanistan before he's rescued by the twins. Then, with him missing out on decades of history, he wonders why the US went to war with Afghanistan, as they were the good guys. This is almost certainly a reference to Rambo 3, where Rambo volunteers for a top-secret undercover mission in Afghanistan to rescue his longtime friend, Troutman, who had been captured and tortured by a Soviet colonel after trying to help the Mujahideen. The movie was even dedicated to the Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan, a sentiment which is basically echoed by Soldier Boy in the episode, as problematic as that actually is now. Speaking of the Rambo 3 parody though, at one point during the movie we hear the famous sound effect, the Wilhelm scream. The Wilhelm scream is a stock sound effect which is usually used when someone is shot, falls from a great height, or is thrown from an explosion, and has been used in a number of movies and TV series, beginning in 1951 with the film Distant Drums, but it has more famously appeared in Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and multiple Quentin Tarantino movies. Now, it's pretty obvious that Soldier Boy is a Captain America parody. You don't really need me to tell you that. I mean, the guy owns a shield that is too heavy for mere mortals to lift, but the parallels did grow deeper between them. As Soldier Boy tells Huey and Butcher that he's going to hunt down his former team who betrayed him, Huey says that Soldier Boy needs the boys to find them, as Soldier Boy has no idea what internet and GPS is, with Soldier Boy thinking that he just made those words up. This is reminiscent of Steve Rogers in Captain America and the Winter Soldier, with his list of modern day references that he needs to catch up on because he's so out of the loop, with both characters having been away from modern society for such an extended period of time. Keeping up with the Marvel parallels, as Soldier Boy gets riled up, the radiation picked up on the Geiger counter goes up. And of course, when Soldier Boy's emotions get the better of him, he literally explodes. This all feels very Hulk-like, with both of them gaining their powers through radiation and setting them off when they get angry. Also, the scene where MM stares down Soldier Boy and Soldier Boy coldly says which one after MM tells him that he killed his family is reminiscent of the scene in Guardians where Drax squares off with Ronin and says a similar line to him, only for Ronin to not be able to recall it. Of course, it could also be a reference to one of my favorite Raul Julia moments in Street Fighter the movie, but probably not. Another Marvel parallel is the 3-on-1 fight that takes place as Soldier Boy, Butcher, and Huey take on Homelander and nearly beat him until he flies off scared. This feels like the 3-on-1 fight in Endgame where Cap, Iron Man, and Thor battle Thanos, except with more nudity and a lot more use of the C word. Speaking of movie references though, the scene where Homelander talks to the person he loves more than anyone, himself, feels very much like the scene where Gollum speaks to his maniacal reflection in Lord of the Rings. Even the disorienting camera work is the same, as the stronger Homelander tries to convince the weaker Homelander that everything will be okay. Also, Homelander's parent issues were on total display in this scene, as in the reflection, Homelander refers to the other one as my boy, indicating that Homelander is still yearning for that father figure, even if it is himself. We got to include the occasional contentious reference that we can't 100% confirm because it's still fun to talk about. Did the Homelander Soldier Boy showdown include an Incredibles reference? As the two trade barbs, Soldier Boy insults Homelander for wearing a cape and suggests that it makes him a fake superhero. You know who else hates capes? Edna Mode, who makes it very clear that capes are a no-go for their super suits. Maybe we'll see Homelander get his cape caught in a plane engine later on in the season. One can only hope. Speaking of that scene, before Soldier Boy takes on Homelander, Butcher intervenes between MM and Soldier Boy and tells MM to drop it. Furious, MM tries to take down Butcher by taking a baseball bat from a glass cabinet and hitting Butcher with it. Now, freezing the frame, I thought it said the glove and the bat belonged to Steve Harvey, aka the host of Family Feud, but after closer inspection, it seems like it actually says Steve Garvey, who was a first baseman for the LA Dodgers during the 1970s, which, you know, now that I think about it, actually makes a bit more sense than a game show host. The Boys has already had some good examples of foreshadowing in Season 3, such as the fight between Huey and Annie, which has been brewing for some time. Part of the reason the two are arguing is that Huey is fed up of feeling weaker than Annie and doesn't want to feel protected by her. This is one of the motives for him shooting up on Temporary V. But could the temporary drug have some long-term ramifications? At one point in the episode, Huey feels a sludge coming out of his ear, a likely side effect from the multiple doses of the Temporary V that he has taken. So might the Temporary V make them permanently sick and ultimately be their undoing? It might just be the case. Throughout the season, as Ashley deals with the stress of dealing with childish and murderous soups, she starts pulling out her hair, which is getting shorter and shorter with each passing episode. And we can perhaps guess that she'll be totally bald by the finale. This could be a nod in the comics, as while Ashley isn't a character, she is heavily inspired by Vought employee Jessica Bradley, who after being betrayed by the comic Stillwell, ends up having a breakdown and pulling out her own hair in a hotel room. Now, other than the virus itself and pretty much every other horrible thing that happened during it, the worst thing about the pandemic was the now infamous cover of John Lennon's Imagine, sung by the likes of Gal Gadot and a number of other celebs. Seeing as the Boys have no problem skewering pop culture, like the Kendall Jenner Pepsi ad or their Morbius tweet, it's no surprise that they decided to take aim at the song, with the Deep, A-Train, and even Black Noir singing in the same manner, along with celebrities such as Patton Oswalt, Rose Byrne, and Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher. Other than Almond Joys, Black Noir seemingly doesn't fear much, but judging by his reaction to hearing the news about Soldier Boy, he does fear Jensen Ackles and his glorious beard. This reaction even concerns Homelander, as Noir is seemingly the only member of the Seven that he actually respects. We have seen some history between Noir and Soldier Boy already in the Nicaragua flashback, but this suggests that the pair have an even darker history together, something which will likely be addressed later on in the season. As Homelander and a V'd-up Butcher fight, Butcher utters the line, "Scorched Earth." This is a reference to the military tactic involving deliberate and usually widespread destruction of property and resources. This essentially shows how far Butcher has come on his quest to kill Homelander, and how he's willing to destroy everything, presumably including himself, to kill his rival once and for all, no matter the collateral damage. As Starlight informs her followers on social media on what really happened at HeroGasm, we see a number of comments, usernames, and hashtags flash up on screen. But my favorite one that I thought was worth a quick shout out was the catchy hashtag Vought lied, people died. Rhymes and gets to the point. I very much like it. One movie trope we see is when Soldier Boy tells Huey that he is not a bad guy, which therefore essentially confirms that he is in fact the bad guy. This line said by a character is a bit of a movie cliche and has been used in a number of them, such as The Social Network. And on this week's episode of What Is MM Wearing? We can see that after he gets sprayed with hero, he changes his shirt into something that isn't actually hip-hop related, but instead the twins, as he wears a TNT Smile Time Show shirt. Also worth quickly mentioning, Huey wears a Kenny Loggins Footloose shirt, cause that man has taste. While the latest episode of The Boys wasn't quite as traumatic and as R-rated as Herogasm, it did deliver some shocking bombshells, including Homelander's lineage and the reason why Soldier Boy was abducted by the Russians in the first place. But that's the things that you probably caught. And this is a things you missed video. So let's just cut all of this intro crap out of here and get right to the meat of the video, shall we? So we kind of all guessed it already, seeing as goo is leaking out of their ears and they end up vomiting up luminescent puke, but episode 7 confirmed that while the superpowers Temporary V give you don't last, they do leave you with permanent fatal side effects, meaning Huey and Butcher are in for some trouble. As Starlight searches through Vought Labs looking for a permanent V to give to Kimiko, she comes across some papers that tell the true nature of Temporary V. And although they only show the effects very briefly, we understand that it's all not very good. If you didn't catch everything that it says on the papers, we can give you a quick rundown here, with it being revealed that taking Temporary V causes the creation of hyper-accelerated malignant tumors. So basically they just have all of the cancer, and on top of that there's also atrophy of the cortex, which is a degenerative brain and nervous system syndrome which can eventually lead to a decline in memory and cognitive abilities. If you've seen Peaky Blinders season 6, this may all sound pretty familiar to you. On top of that, it is revealed that there is an accelerated growth of the tumor with each dose, and it will eventually lead to the user having seizures every 1 to 2 hours or so. Now, while I don't personally have an exact count, Huey has roughly 3 doses, but so far hasn't exceeded 5. But if he takes even 1 dose, he's already at risk of becoming terminally ill. However, for Butcher, it might already be too late, as he is definitely shot up at least 5 times, meaning he will likely feel the repercussions of using Temporary V in the recently announced 4th season of the show. All of which could mean the Butcher's days might be numbered, meaning the target on Homelander's back will be even larger. One thought I do have though is, could he take Permanent V instead, and will that be enough to save him? Or is the damage already done? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Another bombshell dropped in the show is the revelation that Soldier Boy is actually Homelander's biological father.
What? That's impossible.
Which is definitely not good news for anybody, including Homelander. This is actually pretty similar to the comics, but it's not actually Soldier Boy who was his biological father, but it was actually another member of Payback, Stormfront. That's right, the character who is his partner, for lack of a better word, in the show is his father in the comics, as it is revealed that he is the progeny of genetic material taken from Stormfront, who's a dude in the comics if you haven't picked that up already, who was injected with Compound V while he was still a member of the Hitler Youth. Homelander seemingly wants to keep the chain of soups going, with him telling Maeve that he plans to harvest her eggs to create a new superchild, which is an absolutely terrifying prospect as well as extremely problematic for a lot of different reasons. Yet another bombshell that was dropped in the episode was the backstory, which was shown in animated form, between Soldier Boy and Black Noir, and how Soldier Boy is directly responsible for the scarring that Black Noir has. We always knew the Black Noir was kind of a weird dude, but not to that extreme, as it is revealed that he has hallucinated animated characters, such as the chipmunk with the Porky Pig style stutter, who we saw in a sketch earlier on in the season, who forces Noir to face his demons, and the horrific abuse that he received from Soldier Boy. It is then revealed that Edgar approved taking down Soldier Boy and plotted for the rest of the team to betray him and take him out. But what is probably the most interesting aspect of this animated flashback is the animals Black Noir subconsciously chose to represent each character. Now, we may be looking a little bit too much into it, but Soldier Boy is represented as a bald eagle, which is associated with power, strength, and of course, good old America. Crimson Countess is portrayed as a fox, which is associated with beauty, intelligence, and independence, and Edgar is portrayed as a meerkat, which are often associated with protection and community. But of course, the most important one out of the bunch is Noir himself, who is represented as a black sheep, which, as you know, basically means that he's an outcast of some sort and is a person who has done something bad that brings embarrassment or shame to his or her family. In this case, it would be the pseudo family, and the shame would likely be his betrayal of Soldier Boy. As I said, might be looking just a tad bit too deep into it, but you know. A new character that was introduced into The Boys was Mindstorm, who ended up putting Butcher into a living nightmare until Huey eventually convinced Mindstorm to release him. Now, while there isn't a Mindstorm in the comics, there is a member of the Payback team who does have a similar name, Minddroid. Now, despite his name and the fact that he's a parody of Marvel's Vision and Iron Man, Minddroid isn't actually an AI, but a human in a robot suit who has limited telepathic powers as well as the ability to fly a jetpack. And it is actually him that has a romantic relationship with Crimson Countess in the comics. Kinda like how, Vision and Scarlet Witch are paired up. Other than providing a crucial look into Butcher's backstory, more on that later, Amazon may have opted to change the character, as he is arguably close to yet another character on their roster of television shows, Robot from Invincible. Speaking of Payback though, we are seeing more and more of the group throughout the season, whether it be through the animated flashbacks or the poster on the wall of Legends house, which actually kind of looks like a reference to a 1999 Mel Gibson movie. In the show, Payback, an obvious nod to the Avengers, are the team that preceded the Seven, but in the comics their history is a little different. Payback are the second most popular super team in the US, behind the Seven. All of them at one point tried to join the Seven but ultimately failed, and were actually paid by Vought to go after the boys, but ended up failing pretty badly as most of them met their end at the hands of Butcher. As we mentioned, we get to see a glimpse into Butcher's backstory as we see his anger and violence stemming from his relationship with his dad, and his relationship with Huey stemming from the death of his brother, who unalived himself when Butcher went off to join the army. Butcher has a lot of remorse about how his brother died, and through the use of editing, we see that he is concerned that he will make the same mistakes with his new pseudo-brother Huey, as he reminds Butcher of Lenny in both personality and looks. Lenny also had a calming effect on Butcher in the comics until his eventual death, but the way he died is a lot different on the show, with Lenny being hit by a bus while he was at college. Also, I know that this might be super nitpicky, but did anyone else notice that the Butcher boys had posters on their walls for both West Ham United and Charlton Athletic? I mean, maybe Billy was a West Ham and Lenny was a Charlton fan, but no self-respecting football fan would have posters up for both of these two teams on their walls. Well, it's really not that surprising that Butcher would be a West Ham fan. I could totally see him in Green Street. Now, we already mentioned that there was a Rambo 3 reference in episode 6 of The Boys, back in our previous video, which if you haven't watched, go ahead and check out. But was the whole Mindstorm storyline a reference to First Blood? I mean, a manhunt in the woods involving a former soldier suffering from mental health issues does sound pretty familiar, doesn't it? Or is that just a little bit too much of a stretch? Let me know. As you know, basically everything Soldier Boy does and says doesn't fly in today's day and age.
If taking drugs is uncool, I'm the most uncool motherfucker on the planet.
But some of his jokes do make much more sense in context. For instance, Soldier Boy refers to Mindstorm as Howard Hughes without the piss pots after learning that he has bought up a bunch of cabins across the states in order to hide himself. To provide some context, Howard Hughes was a famous business magnate, film director, and record-setting pilot, among other things, and was known for having a number of cabins, such as his most famous one on Lake Tahoe, where he would throw lavish parties. While the piss pot line was a reference to the reported fact that in his later years as a recluse, Hughes would store his own urine in mason jars, although I'm not well enough informed to know if that's true or not. Soldier Boy also tells Huey that if he keeps talking, he would slap him like Connery, which is a reference to Sean Connery's rather infamous quote about slapping women. And to be honest, likely a reference to the early Bond movies, which are kind of questionable these days if you really just sit back and think about it. Now, in previous videos, we've given you one possible Sylvester Stallone Easter egg, but how about another one? In the animated flashback, it is revealed that Noir was up for the role of Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop, until Soldier Boy sabotages this, saying that he wasn't funny enough to take the role, which was of course then played by Eddie Murphy. The reason this could be a nod to Stallone is the fact that he was originally attached to the project after the success of First Blood, but he didn't care for the humor and ended up taking the script and turning it into a straight action movie, which turned out to be the movie he made in 1986, Cobra. Paramount weren't exactly too keen on these changes, due to the fact that it would have increased the budget significantly, and Stallone ended up leaving the project before being replaced by Murphy. Man, first talking about brain tumors and now the pre-production history of Beverly Hills Cop. This video is all over the place. This next reference is also pretty subjective, but did anyone else think that the scene where Homelander hallucinates Soldier Boy while giving a speech at Singer's rally was like the veiled assassination scene in Taxi Driver? I mean, both Travis Bickle and Soldier Boy are murderous military characters with PTSD, and the whole framing of the scene gave me some pretty strong Taxi Driver vibes. But yeah, I'll admit that that one might just be completely subjective and not actually real. Still though, cool sequence. We have seen throughout the show Vought's equivalent of major companies, such as Voughtland and Vought Networks, and it would seem that they have a space branch as well. As Cassandra argues with the Deep after the whole troubling scene with the octopus, Cassandra tells the Deep that she left a VASA role for him, which suggests that Vought have their own version of NASA. Perhaps, like Elon, they're trying to colonize Mars as well, only with slightly more problematic super people. While the boys likes to skewer tropes, as we mentioned in other episodes of this series, they are still guilty of committing them every now and then, such as the moment where Starlight catches Homelander confessing and airing out his dirty laundry on her livestream. This is a movie/television cliche that has been seen multiple times, like in Knives Out and Zootopia, just to name a few. While Jack Quaid's Huey Campbell is the most famous Huey on The Boys, he's not the only one to appear in the episode. On the wall of MM's apartment, we see a poster of Huey Newton, who is famously known as the founder of the Black Panther Party and who crafted the party's 10-point manifesto with Bobby Seale in 1966. And just a quick one here, at the beginning of the episode, Soldier Boy treats us with his singing, as he performs a rendition of If You Wanna Be Happy by Jimmy Soul, which, if you look at the lyrics, is another thing that doesn't fly in today's day and age. If that video was itself a parody of a particular commercial that I just don't know about, make sure you let me know down in the comments below. So The Boys Season 3 ended with quite a literal bang, and with an eye-popping spectacle. But as this is a Things You Missed video and not a recap video, we're gonna ignore all that and get down to the good stuff. And yes, there will be spoilers in this video. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So first off the bat is a callback to Season 1 that takes place as Huey and Annie hash it out in the car, as they head on their way to confront Soldier Boy. As they talk, Huey recounts how his father tried to cope without Huey's mother around, and how they would eat pizza rolls together. And Huey said that his father, who he thought was weak because of it, was actually really strong. The pizza roll reference is a callback to Season 1, when the two discuss their love of pizza rolls in an argument, and Simon Pegg delivers arguably the best line of the series with, "You love pizza rolls," before Huey says, "Yeah, when I was 7. What a liar. You never stop loving those small pockets of molten lava."
I am not 7.
As the episode comes to a close, we see a montage of all the different characters, such as the Deep eating away his troubles to the song Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John. But why that song exactly? Well, in that song, the narrator is saying goodbye to the Yellow Brick Road, which is a symbol for wealth and fame, because he wants to take back control of his life and return to his more humble farm roots. This is all pretty fitting, as it comes as Maeve decides to leave the Seven for good after losing her powers and faking her death, and instead go into hiding on a farm where she can live in peace, leaving the spotlight forever, or at least for now. I mean, she was kind of a bit more forced into doing it, as Homelander would have probably tracked her down and killed her otherwise, but the farm choice is certainly a nice touch. Speaking of Maeve's fate though, her leaving the show, well, presumably leaving, she can still come back later on I guess, is different from what happens in the comics. Although the final showdown with Homelander and Soldier Boy does have some similarities to her comic book fate. That's because in the comics, Maeve was also in a relationship with Homelander, but left him and ended up joining the boys after Homelander tricked her into sleeping with Black Noir. While working with the boys, Maeve ends up sacrificing herself to save Starlight from Homelander and Black Noir. And although she's pretty easily defeated in that fight, unlike on the show where she manages to wound Homelander pretty badly, by taking on Homelander, she managed to give Starlight enough time to actually escape. Either way, Maeve's sacrifice in both the show and the comics wound up saving Starlight both times. This isn't specifically a reference, but honestly, there's nowhere else for me to talk about it, so I'm just gonna bring it up here. Continuing on with Maeve, one of the most gruesome moments in the episode comes when Homelander pulls a mountain from Game of Thrones and pops her eye with his thumb. Something pretty similar did happen in the comics, although it wasn't Maeve that lost her eye in a fight, but instead Stormfront. Stormfront had a phobia of going blind and having his eye damaged in a fight, and he ended up having his eye ripped out by Kimiko during the scrap, understandably leaving him in a whole world of pain. The Stormfront of the show, though, of course, lost a lot more than just an eye.
No one suffers like you suffer. Let me help.
Seeing as how he is just a straight up parody of Captain America, there are a number of parallels that can be drawn between Soldier Boy and Cap. Except for the fact that Soldier Boy probably wouldn't go back in time to date Peggy, if you know what I mean.
Huey, listen, these women, they're like fine wine, okay? The older they get, the more delicious, but the drier.
Anyways, back to the topic at hand. During the final fight, Butcher and MM attack Soldier Boy, and Butcher ends up punching through his shield and breaking it, much to Soldier Boy's shock and sadness.
You shield, bitch.
This immediately made me think of the moment in Endgame where Thanos breaks Captain's shield, again very much to Cap's shock and sadness. Another parallel between the two is obviously the fact that they served in World War II, although it is revealed that neither had quite the glamorous experience as it was made out to be. Also, though there are some similarities between Soldier Boy and Cap's reasoning for trying to become a super soldier, Cap of course was small and frail and wasn't strong enough to serve in the army, so he decided to take the super soldier serum in order to serve his country. Soldier Boy meanwhile revealed to Butcher that he signed up for VOT testing because he was belittled by his father for not being enough of a man, something that he basically recites to Homelander and Ryan later on, and Huey pretty much all the rest of the season. And he just really wanted to make himself stronger, although his father ended up resenting him even more as he saw it as taking a shortcut. Speaking of parallels though, basically all of the male characters on the show, other than Huey, have a bad relationship with their fathers, with Butcher's old man being an abusive alcoholic, Soldier Boy's dad also being an abusive alcoholic, Frenchie's dad being an abusive drug addict, and Homelander's dad being Soldier Boy, aka an abusive alcoholic. It's probably for the best that Arnie doesn't show up and try to play a game of who's your daddy and what does he do. MM's storyline is also defined by his relationship with his father, as his father's hatred of Soldier Boy and obsession with getting revenge mark their relationship, and MM worries that his own hatred for Soldier Boy will strain his relationship with his daughter. A surprisingly sad moment in the show comes in the scene where Homelander kills Noir and leaves him to die with his animated friends. This is actually a complete reversal from the comic books, where Noir was actually the one who killed Homelander. That's because in the comics it was revealed that Noir is actually a clone of Homelander, who Vought created to keep Homelander in line, and were using as a puppet to frame Homelander for a number of nefarious deeds, including eating a baby. It was kinda gross. Once this twist was revealed on the page, Homelander went berserk and tried to kill Noir, but he ended up failing as Noir killed him instead by breaking his jaw and opening his face. Yeah, that'll do it. Now the Noir clone twist was done away with a long time ago on the show, but it's interesting to see a complete role reversal with it being Homelander that ended up killing Noir, and then going on a hypocritical rant at A-Train for quote-unquote killing his own kind. So obviously one of the biggest twists in the penultimate episode was the reveal that Soldier Boy was Homelander's biological father, and they end up having some quality father-son time in the finale. However, fun little fact, Anthony Starr is actually 2 years older at 46 than his on-screen dad, who is only 44. Now I know that it doesn't matter much in terms of context of the show, as Soldier Boy hasn't aged, but I thought it was worth a mention. Either way, if I can look half as good at them at that age, I'd be lucky. Heck, if I can look half as good at them at 33, I would be lucky. One thing I did wonder during the fight with Maeve, did Homelander initially pull his punches? At the beginning of the fight, after he says, "Not now, Maeve," it seems like Homelander is actually holding back just a little bit in the fight. Could it be because he's still in love with her? Or did he just want to keep her alive to harvest her eggs? Or maybe he just didn't want to kill 2 soups in one day. Although, I guess he planned on killing Soldier Boy, so I guess it would have been 3 soups in one day. Either way, you decide. You remember earlier on in the season when we saw Homelander watching Dawn of the Seven, and the sound was obscured as he was deep in thought thinking about Stormfront? This is extremely similar to a moment in this episode. As Butcher learns of his fate, the sound is obscured as he focuses on something else, so he can't hear exactly what the doctor is saying, and it is only later that he verifies he's aware of his terminal diagnosis. Also, unfortunately, unlike Arnie, it is a tumor. This is also similar to the Breaking Bad pilot where Walt learns that he has lung cancer and looks down at the mustard stain on the doctor's coat while the sound is obscured. The writer actually made me include that last little bit, so there you go, I guess. Another maybe reference comes at the end of the episode where Ryan looks at the camera and his expression changes from shock to a small, creepy smile. This feels very similar to the fourth wall-breaking stare Norman Bates does at the end of Psycho, as his internal monologue reveals he wouldn't hurt a fly. Now this reference is even more tenuous, but the writer put it in here, so here we go. The evacuation of Vought Tower felt a lot like the terror threat sequence in another great show, Secession. Both focus on the media centers of the buildings they work in, and both involve a character being demoted from the VIP escape to having to slum it with the normies. The only thing The Boys was missing was a water bottle fight or a small attack child. One of the best sequences in the finale comes as Kimiko takes on the armed guards who try to stop Frenchie from brewing up a fresh batch of Novichok, with Kimiko taking them out in a classically gory style to a fun soundtrack. The song in question here is of course Maniac from Flashdance, and its use was teased in the penultimate episode. And on our very last episode of What is MM Wearing? For this season at least, the man did not disappoint. As we've mentioned in a lot of our other videos, MM tends to wear a number of different hip-hop inspired t-shirts. And of course, this is how he ended the season. In this episode, we see him wearing both a Snoop Dogg shirt and a Tupac shirt. Again, reinforcing the fact that this man has taste. Now, it's hard to ignore that the Homelander rallies are a parody of real-life MAGA rallies in the US, with red hats and everything.
Yeah! Yeah!
And they seemingly included one of the most famous faces from the events of January 6th in the finale, the QAnon Shaman. If you look closely at the background during the final scene, you can make out someone who looks exactly like the QAnon Shaman standing amongst the other Homelander fans. And finally, this isn't an entry that pertains to the final episode exclusively, but the final scene where Homelander shows off Ryan to his fans was not shot in New York, but shot at David P. Cutt Square in Toronto, which, side tangent, is where the writer got starstruck by Javier Bardem during TIFF and made an ass out of himself. But that's a completely irrelevant piece of information to end the video with. You're welcome.